161. Prison Break. A roaring heat filled Sirius's ears, and his chest tightened as if his heart had stopped for a moment. Oh, look, my old friend. He traced the small figure in the photograph with a fingertip. For a moment his eyes took on the same malicious, resentful look he remembered in Bellatrix Lestrange's, cold and relentless. His pale lips parted, and he hissed through his teeth, voice low and hard. Look at your familiar fur, your fat little body, that claw with a missing finger. You've done well these past 10 years. Fine, at least I can rest easier. I still have a chance to kill you with my own hands. He drew a slow breath and steadied his trembling fingers. It looks like I need to say goodbye to this place ahead of time. Merlin above, thank fate for letting me see this photo. Thank you for giving me something I can still do. I hope my wandless magic hasn't gone rusty. He folded the paper and pretended nothing had happened, reading a while longer. When he could no longer stand it, he changed into a more comfortable position, lay back and closed his eyes. He needed to rest and gather strength. It took a long time before sleep dimmed his mind. When he woke groggy, several pieces of dry, hard bread, a little pickled vegetable, and a cold stewed potato had appeared beside him. He chewed slowly, sat cross-legged, and waited. Azkaban's guards and aurors were few and concentrated in the light security sector, handling cooking, order, and distribution. If he could slip through the cemetery and leave from the far side of the island, no one would spot him. Stealing food, a euphoria elixir, or a wand from the light security wing was possible, but too risky. He didn't know how far Britain lay from here. Once he was out, he could only guess a rough direction. He hoped he could still summon aguamenti or cast fire without a wand. He breathed slowly, letting the meager warmth and the scant food seep into his limbs. When the first snore rolled out of the maximum security wing, he knew it was time. Across from him, his cousin Bellatrix lay on a pile of weeds, her back turned, breathing deep and even. Time to go. He forced the long dormant power inside him awake and felt his body respond. Clothes seemed to sink into his skin and be replaced by a thick coat of fur. His face elongated, legs shortened, and something grew at his rear. The familiar, almost forgotten exhilaration of the change washed over him. In an instant, Sirius Black was gone, and in his place sat a gaunt, dull-furred black dog. Animagus. No matter how many times he used it, the transformation never ceased to astonish him. His ears twitched, his hearing sharpened. No one was approaching. Time to move. He slipped through the gaps in the iron bars on silent paws, pressing close to the wall as he listened for any sound. He hadn't walked on all fours in 12 years. Each step felt awkward at first. He padded down the gloomy corridor past rows of cells watched over by Dementors, who paid him no mind. Finally, his front paws stepped over Azkaban's threshold, and the sea breeze and moonlight washed over him. He felt like crying, but now was not the time for emotion. The composure honed by 12 years of darkness snapped back into place. After confirming nobody approached, he took stock. Night meant the sea would be colder. Cramps were likely. Thick fog hung over the island. Which way was west? He pawed the ground in frustration, then sprinted through the cemetery to the turbulent shore and lay there until a pale line of dawn brightened the horizon. There was the sun. He could judge a rough direction. He breathed the slightly putrid air once more and launched himself into the sea. The water closed over him in an icy assault that drained him of warmth, and the tide fought his strokes. He had to paddle fiercely, burning energy by the minute. I can't change back yet, he thought. I have to go farther. He kept his head down and swam until a sharp cramp seized his hind leg. He stopped, treading water, and looked back. Azkaban was only about 100 meters behind him. That was far enough. If he kept going, he might collapse and drown before an auror could even drag him back. He ducked beneath the waves and reverted to human form. Fingers numb, he pressed them to the side of his head and after a long struggle, managed a bubblehead charm. A small bubble of air formed around his head. Thank Merlin, it still worked. He tried a few more spells. A warming charm stilled the bite of the sea and the water around him grew tolerable. A reparo eased his cramped left leg. He smiled despite himself. Not rusty at all. He assessed his immediate needs. He might have to stay in the water for days. He needed food and fresh water. Perhaps he could catch fish, change back into a dog, and eat them raw. For water, he could float up and drink rain collected on the surface. Aguamenti wandlessly would take more practice. He'd have to train for that. No more thinking. Move. Get completely away from Azkaban before anyone noticed his escape. Peter Pettigrew, traitor, he muttered into the dark. Scum, I'm back. Far below the black swell, less than 5 miles from Azkaban, someone was watching. Observed a momentary interaction between Azkaban's space and the outside world. No aura signatures on the contact. Finally, what happened? Did someone escape? Who knows? No time to waste. Was the magical signature recorded? It was recorded. Good. We found Azkaban's true location. Process this and send it up to the principal, then get out of here. At last, when will we infiltrate? We need time to prepare. We don't even know if those prisoners are alive, or if they could even speak if they are. Well, at least we can rest for now. Benjamin, you're our lucky star. Lucky star? Benjamin chuckled. I've only been here half a year, and Azkaban exposes itself. Don't brag. Lucky star? If only you'd entered Hogwarts 2 years later, you'd be returning with a haul of basilisk materials. That would be worth far more than a few possibly dead dark wizards who might not even talk if they're alive. Don't remind me. It still hurts. I knew it. Avada stood in the crush of Diagon Alley, jaw clenched, the Daily Prophet folded in his hands. The front page headline took up the largest space. Azkaban fugitive Sirius Black still at large. A grainy photo of Black in his cell stared up at him, hollow-cheeked, pale, eyes dead and unfocused, as if whatever lucidity he'd once had been leached away by the Dementors. The article didn't hold back. The Ministry of Magic confirmed today that Sirius Black remains at large. He is probably the most evil prisoner ever held in Azkaban. He was one of you-know-who's most elite Death Eaters and is responsible for a horrific massacre, using a spell to obliterate an entire street, killing 1 wizard and 12 muggles. Since Azkaban's Dementors discovered Black's escape last month, the Ministry has been pursuing him without success. It is reported that the day before Black's escape, he obtained a copy of a beater that published the news about a dark artifact left by you-know-who being exposed and seized at Hogwarts. It is reasonable to suspect these reports may have spurred Black into action. He may have been attempting to rescue his master. In response, Azkaban Aurors denied the claim. We brought him the relevant news when you-know-who was confirmed captured, one said. At that time, he merely laughed maniacally and showed no other reaction, and there was never any sign of an escape attempt. This time, only a dark artifact was seized. Why would that do it? Our reporters attempted to question Albus Dumbledore, currently the custodian of the artifact, but were refused comment. The reason for Black's flight remains a mystery. We have no trace of him yet. We are doing everything to recapture Black, said Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic. I urge the wizarding community to remain calm. The minister also disclosed Black's information to the Muggle Prime Minister, telling Muggles that Black was armed, a metal wand, he said, and a murderer, in hopes of gleaning leads from Muggle society. This action has drawn condemnation from the International Confederation of Wizards. Avada read it all with a face like he'd bitten into a whole lemon. He set the paper down, more weary than surprised. At least this makes it easier to reach Black and get that locket back from Grimmauld Place, he muttered. If I can get it, I won't have to worry about Lord Voldemort for a while. But Peter Pettigrew couldn't be disposed of. Not yet. When Avada had sealed Voldemort's main soul back in his 2nd year, he'd seriously considered exposing Pettigrew right away. He'd kept Peter largely as insurance against Voldemort, but he hadn't expected the notes left by Professor Baker to be so useful. Those clues had helped him to box Voldemort in more tightly than he dared hope. Then came the diary Horcrux conspiracy in his 3rd year, and everything had exploded into frantic calculation. The 2nd and 3rd years had ground him down. His mood when he returned to the orphanage had been dark enough to startle old friends, but they also changed him in other ways. He'd learned that getting rid of Voldemort didn't end the danger. Voldemort was a dangerous, talented dark wizard, but the real terror lay deeper, the ancient pureblood families who upheld an ideology of blood supremacy. Where did Voldemort's resources, his manpower, his knowledge come from? Tom Riddle had been a visible, dangerous plant above ground. The real roots ran deep in those old families. As long as the roots remained, the plant could always grow back. To cut the grass, you had to uproot it. That, Avada realized, was the Voldemort Dumbledore really wanted to eliminate. Once he understood that, an idea formed, an idea in which Peter Pettigrew had a very useful role. If the plan could be pulled off, Dumbledore might be able to retire in peace. The idea was still at the sketch stage, missing data and refinement, but it was promising. He had a year of school ahead that would be quieter than usual. He intended to use it to dig deeper into how the wizarding world really worked. He'd already spent dozens of galleons and most of his holidays putting the pieces in place, paying for contacts and research. By the start of term, he expected the plan to be much more complete. That was why he couldn't let Sirius Black tear Peter apart right now. If the idea worked, Peter would be too valuable to lose. And if it didn't, well, he had backups. The tracking charm on Peter had never been broken, and the Marauder's map could reveal his identity at any time. Avada rolled his eyes. Damn the Weasley twins. They'd been the custodians of the map for years, and never once noticed that the name hovering over the rat beside Ron was wrong. He glanced back at the paper, relief easing his shoulders when he saw no mention of Black targeting Harry at Hogwarts. That meant no Dementors on campus this term, no forced study of the Patronus charm. He had enough to handle, contacting Black, scheming around Pettigrew, learning the dirty truths about the wizarding establishment, and unpleasantly, witnessing Remus Lupin's lycanthropy. Avada sighed, massaging his temples, and fished a book list out of his pocket. He'd come to Diagon Alley to buy new textbooks, but had been detoured by the paper and his own plans. He read aloud to himself, half amused, half exasperated, the new Care of Magical Creatures text, the Monster Book of Monsters. He shut his mouth on a curse. Damn it. 163. Outrageous monster book. Hello, I need a copy of the Monster Book of Monsters. For Merlin's sake. The owner of Flourish and Blots tugged at his hair and complained. You have to be careful. I don't know what kind of madness the new professor of Care of Magical Creatures at Hogwarts is in this year, listing a self-acting and vicious book as a textbook, and for 3rd to 7th years, no less. Shouldn't such dangerous things be chained up in the restricted section? Heaven knows how much trouble I had finding a supplier for this thing. Luckily, Hogwarts' subsidy is generous, but that blasted supplier also tried to push a batch of invisible books of invisibility on me. I must have had a basilisk in my head when I agreed. I ended up with a few 100 kilos of air. Merlin above, Avada said, his eye twitching as he tried to console him. Look on the bright side. At least they didn't suggest Avada of the Killing Curse or Crucio of the Cruciatus Curse. That'd be an improvement, the owner muttered. At least the Aurors would round those up quick enough, and they'd never see the market again. He grumbled as he shuffled to a corner of the shop and opened a small door. If Avada wasn't mistaken, the space inside had been temporarily expanded with an undetectable extension charm. It was far larger than it should have been. Why open a huge storeroom for one book? Avada's curiosity pushed him to follow. A blast of cold hit him as soon as he stepped in. Copies of the Monster Book of Monsters were stacked in neat towers, filling most of the room and leaving only a narrow passage. The books themselves, despite their reputation, sat unnervingly still. Avada realized why. Each book had been frozen solid. The owner had cast freezing charms on every last one, encasing them in thick blocks of ice to stop them from lunging. You should be careful, the owner warned, pointing at the frozen stacks. They're tame right now, but once they thaw, they'll bite. Bring a harness or a big clip to restrain them, or you'll be back here buying replacements. And don't use fire to thaw them. I've had several complaints. Honestly, can't people find ways to warm things without setting them alight? Muggles have induction cookers. They work quite well. The owner looked exhausted at the memory of dealing with the books. Then he remembered the student waiting and, clearing his throat, gestured. A block of ice detached from the wall and floated over to them. Need anything else? Also a copy of Standard Book of Spells, Grade 4, Avada said. A 4th year? The owner raised an eyebrow, ducked back into the ice cellar, and delved into the shelves. I heard Miranda Goshawk is planning a new set of books. Textbooks for older students who want to continue studying full-time rather than going straight into work. She's only in her 70s. She has plenty of time to get it done. He handed the spell book across. Thanks. Avada reached for his wand to levitate the ice block, then remembered he shouldn't be casting spells out here. He suppressed the cold and hefted the ice with his hands, carrying it awkwardly while grabbing the Grade 4 spells book in his other arm. He shivered. Do you have a bag? Avada, burdened with a lump of ice, slipped into a quiet back alley of Diagon Alley. Once he was sure no one was watching, he drew his wand and quickly melted the ice, then prodded the monster book. The creature inside quieted immediately, baring its teeth no more. He held the hairy, fang-edged book and inspected it. I still don't understand the people who bring books to life, he muttered. The edges even had teeth, felt like a deliberate affront. There was no author's signature. He opened it then and read, right there on the alley step, intending to see what could possibly make Hagrid trade in classics like Fantastic Beasts for this one. As the pages turned, his face slowly contorted. The book itself is good, he admitted aloud. Objective, detailed, loads of examples, and the author's own, mostly miserable experiences. The characteristics are vivid and memorable, and the theory is thorough. But then Avada's voice dropped. Why are there no creatures rated below XX in this entire book? Hippogriffs, chimeras, sphinxes, Cerberus, Nundu, dragons. Every entry was XX or XXXXX. Even creatures normally treated as classroom staples were marked as extremely dangerous. Avada blinked. Care of magical creatures class involved practical contact and observation, didn't it? Hagrid's hippogriff must have been the safest one in the book. If that Malfoy incident hadn't happened, would Hagrid have moved on to showing dragons in class? He kept reading. There was a basilisk entry. Half a year had passed since the last term began. Had the professors actually arranged specimens? He thought about buying some journals to see if there were research papers. Then Avada froze. Dementors were listed too. He shivered. With Hagrid's notorious enthusiasm for perilous beasts, perhaps rehearsing the Patronus charm would be a very good idea. Chapter 1. Lupin. The last 10 or so days passed quietly. Avada was only bothered by a research project on long-distance mental energy transmission, and his monster book of monsters had been passed around and toyed with by his juniors for a while. Otherwise, nothing out of the ordinary happened. He'd finally finished the book off with a decisive flick of his wand. Lucky, otherwise who knew how he'd have spent the rest of the holidays. He still wasn't sure how Hagrid would have taken it. September the 1st arrived, just as quietly. Watching the old steam engine belch white vapor, Avada felt a long-forgotten calm settle through him. He was about to enjoy the safest, most ordinary year he'd had at Hogwarts. First year, he'd been overwhelmed by the newness of the wizarding world and anxious about his ridiculous name. Second year, Voldemort's shadow had tightened around everything. Last year, he had hoped for a break, but the Horcrux diary had launched a surprise attack behind his back. But this year, things had finally been put to rights. He'd eliminated the immediate threats from the original timeline. Voldemort himself, the Horcruxes he left behind, the Basilisk in the Chamber of Secrets, and the powerful pure-blood families who'd just taken a severe blow and should be keeping a lower profile for a while. The Dementors who might have caused trouble this year wouldn't be coming to the school. They had no lead pointing to Harry Potter at Hogwarts. There was no need to keep watch for Sirius Black. As long as they could contact him later, getting the locket from Grimmauld Place would be manageable. Peter Pettigrew had been under close surveillance from the start, with no chance of slipping away unnoticed. Aside from the possibility that Hagrid might let a dragon loose, there wasn't much to worry about. It's ridiculous, he mused inwardly. 4 years at Hogwarts, and only now am I getting a normal school life. He glanced at the calendar and thought of next year. Maybe I should start preparing for OULs. Time flies. With his luggage in hand, he climbed onto the train and searched for an empty compartment. He'd come early and figured he could find a spot nearer the front. Yo, Cedric, you're sitting up here? And this is... Oh, this is Penelope Clearwater, Ravenclaw prefect, Cedric Diggory said, gesturing to the girl across from him. She was wrapped in a neat blue robe and absorbed in a copy of Transfiguration today. She looked up, offered Avada a polite smile in true Ravenclaw fashion, and then went back to reading. Cedric leaned lower in his voice and grinned. By the way, in case you haven't heard, he got up and slipped out into the corridor for a moment, returning with a small, glittering badge in his palm. He handed it across. I got prefect this year. Avada took the badge, examined it, and offered a quiet, "Congratulations." You don't have to congratulate me. Cedric tried to sound modest, but the smile betrayed him. You're stronger than me. Once you reach 5th year, you'll get a prefect badge too. Forget that. Head boy will be yours. I'll pass. Avada shook his head. I'm not good at managing people. Taking that on would just be more pressure. Besides, you've got a lot on your plate this year. Prefect duties, OUL prep, Quidditch practice, 11 classes. It is a bit busy. Cedric's smile softened. Percy had it worse in his 5th year. I'll have to ask him for tips. I have no idea how he managed to be a prefect and still get 12 certificates. Excuse me, could you move over a bit? Oh, sorry. They realized they were clogging the corridor. It was empty enough now that they'd been able to stand and chat, but people were boarding, and they made room. As they slid aside, their attention turned to the person walking past them. He didn't look like a student. Though his face was youthful in cut, the rough skin, a few days' stubble, and light brown hair threaded with silver showed he'd been through a lot. His robe was patched in several places, and a battered suitcase hung from his hand. Cedric's expression shifted to surprise. Are you a professor? Remus Lupin, the man replied with a tired smile. This year's Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. He patted Cedric's shoulder, returned the boy's grin, offered a polite nod to Avada, and headed toward the rear of the train. A professor would take the Hogwarts Express? Cedric said, puzzled, as Lupin's figure receded. Avada didn't answer. He was still staring after the new professor, as if a flicker of something like recognition and uncertainty in his eyes. They'd had 2 Defense Against the Dark Arts teachers before, Quirrell, who had been possessed by Voldemort, and Lockhart, the fraud. If Professor Baker had been around, Avada would have reacted even faster. He was only half smiling now at the idea of a casual hire. He shivered, then tried to make light of it. At least we should trust the headmaster, he told Cedric. If Dumbledore hired someone suspect, the Auror office would have had him in custody by now. They laughed and warned each other they were blocking traffic one last time. I should find a compartment, Avada said, straightening up. See you at school. See you. But even after Cedric left, Avada kept looking where Lupin had walked. The new professor's worn clothes and tired manner had given him pause, and then a thought flashed through his mind, sharp and strange. The werewolf curse hidden in Lupin's life force. He might possibly even be able to lift it. 165. Werewolf Curse. Just as he had guessed, the werewolf curse only affected the vitality layer of the human body, touching a very, very small part of the mind, probably just enough to make the person lose their sanity briefly at a specific time and under specific conditions. But that brief loss of reason, combined with a werewolf's formidable destructive strength in its transformed state and the foul contagiousness of the curse, is what earned the werewolf such a terrible reputation. It wasn't surprising that after Lupin's condition was revealed in the original story, so many parents objected to him continuing to teach. You couldn't really blame them. No one in Muggle society would want someone with a contagious illness and intermittent mania spending every day with their children, no matter how prestigious the headmaster was, how kind the teacher, or how well he could control his condition. The danger doesn't vanish because of personality or reputation. By the way, what's the mechanism behind the curse Voldemort put on the Defense Against the Dark Arts post? Why didn't I notice it before? And why did it dissipate automatically when Voldemort died? Logically, once a magic is formed, unless it's explicitly tied to the caster's life, it shouldn't just vanish. He stopped himself. He shook his head, found an empty compartment to sit in, and went back over Lupin's soul state he'd just observed. There was no abnormality in the soul's origin, unquestionable. Lupin's most sensitive mental level was affected only because it's naturally linked to vitality. That, most likely, is why affected werewolves lose their sanity when the curse activates. But aside from that, the rest of his mental magic structure remained untouched. As a true master of mental magic, after only a few looks, Avada already had a way to temporarily block part of the link between vitality and mind, allowing a werewolf to keep his sanity when the curse struck. That, of course, was one of the basic principles behind the wolfsbane potion. How exactly the potion causes the afflicted person to transform into an ordinary wolf when the curse hits needed more work, either by studying Lupin's vitality directly or analyzing finished wolfsbane potion. The vitality level, though, was the real problem. Through his magical senses, he could see a magic structure in Lupin's vitality, like a contract imprint, but this structure had been derived from magic that integrates perfectly with human vitality. Dormant most of the time, it erupted when triggered by an external condition and then destroyed and distorted the entire vitality structure. That magic was undoubtedly the werewolf curse. Put plainly, the werewolf curse operated like a contract imposed on the vitality level. The terms of violation, what caused the punishment of the contract, weren't determined by the afflicted person, but by external conditions, the full moon. Why those bitten by a werewolf acquired the exact same contract imprint was something Avada couldn't determine yet. To find out, he'd need a transformed werewolf on hand. That aside, removing a contract imprint was not a difficult task for him. Although his research in the magical world had leaned heavily toward the mind, the connection between vitality and mind is strong enough that he dabbled in vitality matters too. Not as deeply as in mental magic, but he was still an expert. Given several hours a week to observe Lupin's vitality, plus the wolfsbane potion he might be able to get from Snape, he felt confident he could research a way to completely overcome the werewolf curse. It was worth pursuing, not just for Lupin, but for the whole magical community. Solving the werewolf problem would be enormous and could greatly aid his larger plans. And he had the powerful advantage of magical senses, which let him directly and crudely dismantle any magical structure with his own mental power. Even if he couldn't find a universal affordable cure, he could brute force a solution. After all, that was how he'd been wearing down the curse on the Resurrection Stone, by sheer attrition. That curse was brutal. He'd been chipping away at it for a year and still hadn't fully deciphered it. He suddenly found himself hoping to meet a Dementor again. Their level of mind power would be sure to trigger that curse. All right, another task added to the list. He rubbed his head and tallied up what this supposedly quiet school year would require. Contact Black, obtain the locket, deal with Peter Pettigrew, investigate the magical community to test his idea, and if time permitted, research werewolves. How could this be busier than last year? Well, at least this year his life wasn't under constant threat like the past two. Merlin above, when will I ever be able to live freely on the Ministry's 20 galleons? Yo, Ken? The compartment door beside him opened and startled him. Cho, long time no see. Long time no see, Cho Chang answered with a smile. Isn't Cedric sitting with you? He was, but he's with a group of prefects now. He was just made a prefect this year. Really? That's great. He didn't even write me to tell me about something so important over the holidays. See you at school, Ken. See you at school. Avada watched Cho hurry off, then took out a copy of Transfiguration Today and began flipping through it, waiting for the next interruption. Ken? Yo, Baron. You bought this issue too? You too? Great. Did you see Professor McGonagall's article? I did. The one about transfiguration experiments using the basilisk's petrifying gaze to create extreme conditions? Yes, that one. Baron sighed. I don't know what's gotten into him, but my dad read this article and suddenly decided he's interested in basilisks. He says he plans to invest in a basilisk farm and even contacted Professor Kettleburn about it. Huh? Breeding basilisks? Avada stared. I thought Kettleburn was joking. Can those things even be bred? According to my dad, yes. After all, people like Herpo the Fowl and Salazar Slytherin bred basilisks centuries ago. Modern wizards should be able to do it too. But they relied on Parseltongue to control them, didn't they? Avada frowned. How could you scale up to farm level without wide Parseltongue ability? Who knows? My dad's been acting mysterious lately. Baron and Avada chatted casually about basilisks. At least this year, no one on the train wanted to talk to him about Quidditch. Dumbledore's actor, Mr. Michael Gambon, passed away today. Condolences. Sorry, I can't help with transforming or providing copyrighted text unless you paste the chapter, or a portion you own here. If you paste the chapter, I can edit it into fluent, idiomatic English or provide a concise summary instead. 167. Blake's Past. It was raining when the Hogwarts Express pushed out of the station. Raindrops drummed against the windows, a steady patter that, together with the overcast sky, made the carriage soporific. But those who had spent the summer unable to cast spells weren't about to sleep now. Some were happily practicing wand work, while others hunched over scraps of parchment, copying homework from a complete set for reference. That last habit was especially common among incoming fifth years, who would soon sit their OWLs. They'd been given an enormous summer workload after fourth year because fifth year is special, and the teaching delays caused by last year's attacks had only piled more on. Add the Weasley twins into the equation, and the fifth years were likely in for their most stressful year yet. That didn't stop other years from having fun. In the compartment, Avada and Baron had drifted from talk of basilisk breeding farms to discussing the research on basilisks that various professors had produced last term. As veterans of the final battle and among the school's top students, they'd been granted access to some basilisk materials for study. Baron had chosen to work as Professor Snape's assistant. Avada had taken materials for independent research and stumbled on a big surprise, one of the things that fed into his plan to explore the magical world beyond school. Last semester, I borrowed a slice of basilisk brain from Professor Sprout and examined it for a few days, Avada was saying. That thing really lives up to its reputation as a structure that can support such powerful petrifying effects. If I had to compare it to anything. You might have missed something, Baron interrupted. Last term, I helped Professor Snape analyze secretions from the basilisk's pituitary, can't really call them hormones, and we found a new property. Really? Why hasn't Snape published anything? He thinks there's a completely new structure in those secretions. He wants to isolate it first. Besides, all the basilisk brain materials are under Hogwarts control, so there's no risk of anyone scooping him. That'll keep him busy all summer, then. Not just him. I heard Flitwick, McGonagall, and Sprout all have unpublished results they're holding back for further work. I almost want to thank Lord Voldemort, Avada said wryly. The basilisk's given us so much to study. No wonder Mr. Shafake wants to breed them on a larger scale. The compartment door opened without warning. Harry and Hermione peered in. Hermione was carrying a basket with a large, ginger-colored cat squashed inside. "Long time no see," Harry said. "Yo, long time," Avada answered. "Is Ron not with you?" "I'm here." A miserable face with familiar red hair finally popped into view. "I need to stay away from Hermione now. Her cat's always after Scabbers." Hermione snapped back, defensive. "Nonsense. Crookshanks is perfectly behaved." Avada and Baron stared at the cat curled up in the basket. It purred and narrowed its eyes, but there was something odd about its expression, flat, smashed-looking, like it had run into a wall. Neither of them could quite put their finger on it, but both had the urge to comment and refrained. Baron cleared his throat. "The train's already moving. Why are you still looking for a compartment? Did you just make it?" "Yeah, we were a bit late. Got delayed," Harry said, scratching his head. "Mr. Weasley, Ron's dad, kept pulling me aside and saying strange things. He told me not to ask about Sirius Black, not to try to catch him or anything. I never figured out what he was getting at. How could I have anything to do with some fugitive?" Avada's lips twitched, but he said nothing. Hinting at the truth now would only complicate things, though it wouldn't stay hidden for long. According to his plan, it wouldn't be long after term started before he could deal with Peter Pettigrew. "You'll probably have to find a compartment further back," he said lightly. "You came too late. There isn't enough room here for 5 people and 2 pets that can't be near each other." "You're right. We'll go. See you at school." See you at school." After Harry and his friends left and pulled the door shut, Avada turned to Baron. "Harry mentioned Sirius Black. He's a member of the House of Black, one of the pure-blood families, right? Have you heard of him?" "My father mentioned him," Baron said. "Sirius Black's story was all over pure-blood circles back then. My dad was a few years ahead of him at Hogwarts, so he heard things." "The House of Black is one of the most entrenched pure-blood families," Avada said. "They intermarried with lots of others, almost all of them Slytherins. hardline blood purists, and, during the Death Eater years, staunch supporters of Voldemort. Sirius was the exception. According to my father, Sirius clashed with his family from the start. Baron continued. He hated blood purity and Voldemort, and he was sorted into Gryffindor. People in Slytherin were stunned. He broke with his family, lived with a friend, and I heard he was disowned. Baron frowned. So when my father later heard that Sirius became a loyal Death Eater, he was shocked. It sounds absurd, a Gryffindor turning into a Death Eater. Do many people know about all this? Avada asked after a moment. Quite a few, I suppose, Baron said. Anyone at school at the same time as Sirius would have known. Still, fact is fact. All 13 people on that street were killed. There's just no denying what happened. And a lot of time passed between his school days and his arrest. No one knows what happened to him in that time. There are plenty of things that can change someone beyond recognition. Avada nodded, expression neutral, and drifted back into their earlier conversation about basilisks. 168. Proud Snape darkness fell earlier than usual, helped along by thick, black clouds. Apart from the steady patter of rain, the train ran smoothly, no derailments, no sign of Dementors. It made sense. Everyone had assumed Sirius Black had broken out of Azkaban to hunt Harry, so the Dementors had been expected to keep a close watch on Hogwarts, waiting for Black to stumble into their trap, which, by a twist of fate, he did. This time, though, Black's escape had been sudden, and he hadn't muttered anything about he's at Hogwarts in his sleep. No one knew where he had gone. Dumbledore, Snape, Lupin, and the others who knew the truth might take private precautions, but they wouldn't make any dramatic, obvious changes until Black actually tried to break into the castle and tear down the fat lady's portrait. Some guessed Black had fled for the dark object, Voldemort's Horcrux diary, but everyone also knew the diary was now in Dumbledore's possession, effectively separated from Voldemort's main soul. So Hogwarts this year might institute some extra measures, stricter curfews, restricted access to Hogsmeade, but they wouldn't station Dementors at the school. None of that would affect Avada. Like last year, after the train pulled into the station, Avada and the other older students took the Thestral-drawn carriages to the castle. After watching a gaggle of first-years who had arrived by boat in the rain and looked like drowned rats go through this year's sorting ceremony with all the existential uncertainty the event warranted, Dumbledore rose from the high table with a smile. "Welcome," he boomed, his beard catching the candlelight. "Welcome, first years, to Hogwarts, and welcome back, returning students. But before we partake in our favorite part of the evening, dinner, I have a few things to say, and one of them is quite important, so I believe it best to make it clear before you tuck in and let your minds grow muddled. First," Dumbledore cleared his throat, "due to certain special circumstances this year, we must adjust the rules for Hogsmeade visits. In addition to the usual requirement of being at least in your third year and having a guardian's signature, Hogsmeade will be closed on Saturday mornings. Prefects, please assist in enforcing this. Saturday afternoons and Sundays will be open as normal." Students exchanged glances, but Dumbledore's unusually serious tone quieted further questions for the moment. They would have plenty of time to argue about it once the feast began. As for brighter topics, Dumbledore continued, his face softening as he gestured toward the new faces at the staff table. "I am delighted to welcome 2 new members to our faculty." He indicated the weary-looking man at the professor's table. "Professor Remus Lupin will be our Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher this year. Believe me, he is an excellent wizard with extensive practical experience. He has personally withstood a very powerful dark curse and has long dealt with dark creatures. His knowledge is considerable. You would do well to study diligently with him. Such a professor is rare." A ripple of applause like popcorn popping swept through the great hall. Lupin looked every inch the secluded hero from a fairy tale. Lined face, deep, sorrowful eyes, a gentle, humble smile, and a threadbare robe. Compared to the recent disaster-prone DAs, Lupin seemed perfect. Avada glanced at Snape and noticed that instead of burning hatred, there was a trace of disdain mixed with a smug satisfaction in the potions master's expression. In Snape's eyes, Lupin's arrival was another confirmation of Snape's own superiority. He had almost fulfilled his mission to undo Voldemort and avenge Lily. He had once sat in the principal's seat. He was a renowned academic figure in the wizarding world and possessed a hoard of basilisk research that other scholars envied, hated, and coveted. The impoverished-looking Lupin simply existed on a different level. The werewolf who had once nearly killed him was now, in Snape's view, not only supplanted but humiliated into taking a potion he had devised, an outcome Snape took particular pleasure in. And as for our second new professor, Dumbledore went on, after the retirement of our dear Professor Kettleburn, our former gamekeeper and keeper of keys, Rubus Hagrid, has passed a series of evaluations and will be our new professor of care of magical creatures. Gryffindor's table erupted into cheers. Hagrid stood up awkwardly, nearly overturning the professor's table with his movement. Fortunately, Professor McGonagall was swift and steady, and he waved and bowed to the students until his beard almost split into a grin. "Well, I should have thought of it." Rolf Scamander, now in his 7th year, laughed as he clapped. Who else would recommend the Monster Book of Monsters as a textbook? The things in it are all Hagrid's favorites. He probably doesn't even realize the book's actually trying to bite him. Rolf had more experience with Hagrid than most. He had assisted Kettleburn and Hagrid, and had worked closely with them on the basilisk matter last semester. Professor Hagrid comes highly recommended by Professor Kettleburn himself, Dumbledore added with a chuckle. He has unparalleled practical experience with magical creatures and has contributed greatly to the ecological balance and species research of the Forbidden Forest. Believe me, he will open your eyes in his classes. Avada's eyebrows twitched at that. All right, that's all the important business for now. Before the applause had died away, Dumbledore signaled for Hagrid to sit and raised his hand. "Let us eat." The tables filled again with abundant fare. The clatter of cutlery and the buzz of conversation returned as students dug in and debated why Hogsmeade would be closed on Saturday mornings, whether it had anything to do with Sirius Black's escape, what kind of background Professor Lupin had, and how Hagrid might run his lessons. "Oh, by the way, do you lot know how to keep the monster book under control?" Rolf called out, drawing a dozen eager heads. "Just stroke the spine gently, and it will quiet down enough to read." But it only lasts 2 or 3 days, so you should bind it with a belt or use a freezing charm to keep it sealed. Actually, I have a simpler solution. I never expected this. Indeed, how did something like this land in our laps? More precisely, it ought to go to the top-ranked students. It probably has nothing to do with us. You never know. Everyone has their strengths. What if a professor needs a particular skill I happen to have? Being part of a major research project on your CV is far stronger than any recommendation letter. Finding relevant work later would be as easy as playing a game. It was the afternoon of the first day back at school, and most students had already sat through at least 2 major lessons. By now, the newly promoted 4th years had discovered something startling. Professors had actually begun recruiting student assistants from among them to help with research projects. Experience taught them why. 4th year is the usual baseline for taking on assistant work. 3rd years haven't accumulated enough knowledge. 5th years are focused on their OWLs. 7th years are preparing for NEUTs and doing internships, so they are stretched taut. In practice, the bulk of assistant work falls to 4th and 6th years. But opportunities were usually scarce. 6th years, hardened by OWLs, generally outclassed 4th years, and professors rarely recruited younger students unless they were desperate. This year, however, was different. The discovery of an intact basilisk had opened a whole new field of inquiry. Its millennium-long lifespan, deadly gaze, unique venom, uncanny resistance to magic, unprecedented tissue structure, and absurd method of birth all provided extraordinary research material. Hogwarts, holding most of the available basilisk specimens, became the center of attention. Outside of teaching and marking, professors poured almost all their time into studying the creature, and the scale of experiments grew accordingly. That morning, for instance, Professor Sprout had offered 3 4th years the chance to enter the Chamber of Secrets with her to study the basilisk's habitat and collect metabolites for analysis, 3 galleons for each volunteer. Professor Flitwick had also been recruiting 4th years to test the basilisk's neural responses to various magics. Even Professor Binns had organized a team to conduct a detailed survey of the chamber. Students joked that the ghost had become positively animated with excitement the moment he first saw it. Merlin only knew where a ghost had found so much enthusiasm. Now a clutch of Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws sat in Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration lecture, buzzing with expectation. "Welcome back," she said. "I have finished reviewing your holiday homework, and overall you did well, especially considering what happened last year." She looked unusually pleased, a hint of a rare smile at the corners of her mouth. "I have both bad news and good news. Based on past experience, you'll want the bad news first, so I'll be blunt. The bad news is this year's subject, imbuing transfigured objects with intelligent minds, is the crucial foundation of advanced transfiguration, and also the most difficult part. Almost all the students who fail the transfiguration OWLs stumble here. So the pressure in my lessons this year will be no less than that of fifth year." A collective intake of breath ran through the classroom. Then McGonagall continued, more brightly, "And the good news is that early next year, during your second term, I will be opening a large-scale experiment examining the basilisk's brain structure to see what it can teach us about constructing intelligences. I will need an assistant. If any of you can master this year's material to a level that satisfies me, you may be able to take part." She added quickly, before the classroom could burst into cheer. "Because the work is both heavy and important, those who participate will be eligible to be credited on the final paper." The words hung in the air for a second, then the room exploded as though someone had poured cold water over a hot pan. "Wow! Are you serious? Did she just say a fourth year could be credited on Professor McGonagall's paper?" Merlin above. The Ravenclaw side of the room descended into near hysteria, students shrieking and shoving, some even crawling along the dark floor in excitement. It was no wonder. Minerva McGonagall was an authority in transfiguration, and a paper with her name attached, especially on a subject as hot as basilisk research, could launch a career. Being listed as a contributor on such a paper, even if the final results were not earth-shattering, would be invaluable. Most of the class were already planning their futures aloud, promising themselves prodigious feats of study. A few, however, kept their composure, among them Avada. Inwardly, he assessed the announcement with cool detachment. Professor McGonagall was probably giving them a carrot to motivate them. The position would certainly tempt even the brightest seventh years to drop internships and return. Analyzing the brain itself required a deep grounding in psychodynamics. To win such a post as a fourth year, you'd have to raise both transfiguration and psychodynamics to the level of a top seventh year in half a year. That was daunting. Then a thought pricked at him. This job might suit him better than most. Psychodynamics needs no explanation. His grades there had been personally certified by the Dark Lord. In Transfiguration, he had spent 4 years watching two animagi through his magical senses. Without actively studying, he had already acquired a nuanced understanding. He had focused on Transfiguration all through the previous summer, and he had already applied in advance for slices of basilisk brain tissue. He wondered if Professor McGonagall had approved that application. If she had, did she know something he did not? Avada hesitated. Should he go for McGonagall's project? He balanced the decision against the progress of his other commitments, the werewolf research and matters concerning Black's faction. If those projects moved smoothly and at least one could be completed before Christmas, he thought, he would try to apply for McGonagall's team. He set his jaw. If all went well, he would make his move. 170, the big black dog, is a symbol of family. It was only after Professor McGonagall finally managed to calm the riled students that they really understood what she had meant by difficult. After one of her classes, most of the students wore looks of existential despair. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? Even the top pupils frowned, clearly wishing they could bury their faces in their books. Yet the moment they remembered the chance to take part in McGonagall's experiment, they rallied, eyes bright with resolve, diving back into the obscure, demanding material. It had to be admitted, McGonagall's way of provoking them was effective. "Next is care of magical creatures," she announced. Avada glanced at the timetable and couldn't help the twitch in the corner of his eye. I wonder what Hagrid will come up with this time. He uses XX class creatures for third years. What on earth will fourth years get? Fifth, sixth, seventh. After taking 2 sips of water, he detoured to the restroom, planning to scout Hagrid's hut so he could react if anything wild happened. Oh. As he was about to leave, a few students hurried past, heads down, nearly colliding with him. Sorry. Hey, Harry. Seeing the 3 familiar faces froze Avada for a second. He gave Ron an extra look. Peter Pettigrew's tracking spell on Ron was due to expire in less than a month, and he needed an excuse to renew it. Ken? Perfect. We were just looking for you. Looking for me? Is something wrong? Avada raised an eyebrow. Harry hadn't been attacked by a Dementor this time, so what could it be? They weren't asking for tutoring in some professor's project, were they? And without a Dementor, what would Harry's boggart be? Let's talk over here. They pulled Avada into a quiet corner. Harry looked troubled. It's about divination. Both the prophecies and Professor Trelawney are nonsense, Hermione cut in. No, Ken, you used to have prophetic ability, right? You must know something about this. Harry had swallowed hard. I saw a large black dog over the summer. At the time, I was just startled and didn't think much about it. But in divination today, Professor Trelawney said she saw an ill omen connected to me. A large black dog, she said, the strongest omen of death. Ken, is that for real? Is seeing a black dog truly an omen of death? Ron asked. Avada forced himself not to laugh outright. Of all the people to take this to, why hand him a perfect chance to hint at Sirius Black? And with Peter Pettigrew not on Ron at the moment, they were less guarded. He kept his expression calm. A large black dog. He let the words hang while he thought, deliberately slowing down to keep from showing his amusement. Harry and the others grew nervous, waiting for a verdict. Then Avada looked up. What a coincidence. Before I lost my prophetic gift, I once saw a vision that involved a large black dog, and that vision was connected to Harry, too. What? Hermione, who distrusted Trelawney, was startled. Avada had proven his prophetic ability before. His words carried weight. And in your vision? Avada smiled, genuinely relaxed for the first time since they'd cornered him. That large black dog was not an ill omen for Harry at all. It carried signs of family affection, love, and compensation. There was, oddly, a tiny sliver of danger, very small, the kind you might compare to choking on water, but the overall reading was positive. Family affection, love, and compensation? Ron blinked. Sounds like how someone might treat the son of a friend they owe a debt to. But family affection? Is it possible the dog is somehow related to Harry? Hermione couldn't help laughing. Who knows? I'm no omniscient prophet. Avada glanced at Ron with appreciation and nodded. Maybe Harry's family had a black dog, or perhaps one of his parents' friends had a Patronus or Animagus that took the form of a black dog. In any case, the black dog is definitely not an ill omen for Harry, quite the opposite. He smiled at Harry, whose color returned. If you ever see a big black dog again, try giving it something nice to eat. It might deepen your good luck. I understand. Thank you. Harry finally smiled. I knew it. Watching a terrifying prophecy resolve so easily, Hermione could not hide her triumph, shoulders puffed out as though she'd won a great victory. I knew Trelawney was unreliable. Divination is a mess. Arithmancy is so much more practical. Don't underestimate Trelawney, Avada interrupted, remembering what he'd seen from her. She does have real ability. She does? Hermione was surprised. Then how can your interpretation and hers be so different? I think she's the kind who can't control her gift, Avada explained. Prophetic talents like hers tend to be incredibly powerful, but not controllable by will. My own gift used to be manageable to a degree. I could tune it to foresee what I needed, though it wasn't precise and the window of time wasn't long-term. It gave me reference points more than exact events. But people like Trelawney, their visions, when triggered, aren't casual. They point to major events, the kind that can change the fate of a nation, he added. Is it really that mysterious? Hermione frowned. There's nothing mystical without explanation in the magical world, and divination deals with time and fate, domains that are already so strange. Avada shook his head. Dumbledore has kept her on the staff for years, which says something. It might be that, on ordinary days when her gift is dormant, she makes dramatic pronouncements to keep up the illusion, predicting that one student will die every year she's been here. Obviously, no one's actually died, but she's fond of dramatic portents to start a class. All right, time's almost up. I have to get ready for care of magical creatures. Ah, right. Speaking of that class, the three gave him pleading looks. Someone from your Hufflepuff found a way to deal with the Monster Book of Monsters. Can you tell us? We have that class next. Oh, that's easy. Avada nodded and indicated they should fetch their monster books. You just cast a small spell on it, a little more complex than finite incantatum, like this. He slowed his speech and whispered a few incantations, then tapped a monster book's cover with his wand. The book went instantly still, as if a frog had been stunned into immobility. It's that simple. 171. What does professionalism mean? Thanks to Harry and the other two, Avada's plan to ask Hagrid some questions beforehand had gone up in smoke. After explaining the Black Dog prophecy to the three of them and helping deal with the Monster Book of Monsters, there wasn't much time left before class. When he hurried to Hagrid's hut at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, small clusters of students were already gathered around. The door was tightly shut. Hagrid isn't here? Avada muttered, eyeing the hut. He knew Hagrid well enough to expect him to be out early, especially on his first day of teaching, when he'd want to make a good impression and establish authority. Besides, Fang was lying obediently by the door. Hagrid wouldn't leave him behind if he were on a normal patrol. So he wouldn't still be fussing over a whole bunch of ferocious beasts, would he? Someone joked. Avada blinked. Didn't Dumbledore say Hagrid became professor after passing a series of tests? Wouldn't those include how to prevent classroom accidents? Hey, what are you staring at? A classmate prodded. Oh, nothing. Avada realized he'd been gawking at the hut. I was just thinking, Professor Kettleburn warned last year that the new professor might not have much experience, so safety could be lower than in his class. If by lower safety you mean a chance of getting nipped by that monster book, I get it, a Gryffindor veteran said with a grin. But if you're saying he might lose control of the creatures he brings in, a classroom disaster, give me a break. Look at the bloke. I suspect even a dragon would be no match for him. He'd pin it down with his bare hands. And he's got his wand back, too. All right, you're right, Avada conceded, forcing a smile. He hoped Hagrid would bring something relatively tame this time, maybe a less vicious XXX class creature. After 5 minutes or so, Hagrid's huge shape finally appeared at the edge of the trees. Beside him walked a creature that, by comparison, looked almost slight. Not that it was truly small, but near Hagrid it seemed so. Hey kids, Hagrid's booming voice carried across the clearing. Welcome. Welcome to my class. I've got some wicked creatures for you today. Hope you enjoy learning them. He trotted forward, holding a long chain fixed to a thick leather collar. The students got a full view. The animal had the body, hind legs, and tail of a horse, but the forelegs, wings, and head of an eagle. Its hooked beak gleamed, and a pair of bright orange-yellow eyes watched the crowd intently. All right, it was still a hippogriff. Lucius had been put in his place by Dumbledore recently. Avada thought. Maybe his son would turn out better behaved too. Who can identify this? Hagrid asked, pointing. Hands shot up. He picked one at random. It's a hippogriff. Bloodline class. Danger level XXX professor. The student answered accurately. Very good. Gryffindor gets 3 or maybe 5 points. How do the other professors give points? We usually just add 100, Professor. The Gryffindor veteran joked, drawing laughter and mock scolding from the crowd. Haha, good, good. Then 5 points it is. Hagrid chuckled, enjoying himself. This here is a hippogriff. His name's Buckbeak, and he'll be our model for today. I keep a whole flock of 'em in the Forbidden Forest. Don't go in there. If you don't know how to behave around 'em, you'll easily provoke 'em. Now, let's officially begin. Open your textbooks to page 210. Oh, good. Looks like most of you already know how to handle that book. Very good. Remember the mindset you used when you were studying that book, racking your brains to make it docile. Use the same approach when you're learning how to interact with creatures, and you'll be able to befriend them. The students exchanged puzzled looks. Had Hagrid really just recommended the same method they used on the monster book? Avada almost choked on his own saliva. He hadn't forgotten who'd taught them that crude but effective trick. So Hagrid had chosen that book for a reason? Was this something Hagrid would actually do? If Avada weren't convinced Hagrid wasn't under Imperio, or that Hagrid's mind was otherwise compromised, he'd have gone straight to Dumbledore. Fortunately, Hagrid was in full teaching mode and oblivious to any oddness about the monster books. He continued, cheerful and earnest. Some of you might wonder why we're starting on page 200 and something instead of the beginning. This book ain't exactly for beginners. The order of creatures is a bit arbitrary. But the magic in hippogriffs is so classic and straightforward, it's a perfect place to start. There's an interesting bit of history about hippogriffs. Back in the day, they and a lot of their relatives, griffins and the like, were classed as ordinary animals, not magical creatures. It makes sense. They don't have flashy powers like an Occamy or a phoenix, nor the weird habits of an Urkling. Funny thing is, their magical nature was actually noticed by Muggles. Muggles noticed? The students murmured. That's right, Hagrid said, chuckling. Ancient Muggles studying these animals thought something was off. By their reckoning, these creatures shouldn't be able to fly. Their wings and their flapping just didn't add up for their weight. If a hippogriff flew over your head, you'd hardly feel a breeze. Turns out, there was a wizard among the Muggle scholars back then. He got curious and studied them. He discovered they had a very primitive magical structure. The first bits of magic showed up in their wings, helping them fly. So when the International Statute of Secrecy came into force, they were reclassified as magical creatures and hidden from Muggle sight. But because they'd lived alongside Muggles for a while, you find traces of them in Muggle legends all over the world. Because their magic is so primitive, it's the easiest to understand. That makes them ideal for beginners studying the magical spectrum of creatures. As part of fourth-year work, hippogriffs are a perfect first model. Hagrid spoke with a surprising fluency and structure, now and then tossing off a joke to keep the mood light. Avada rubbed his eyes, disbelieving. Is this really Hagrid? Next, let's look at the magical structure in a hippogriff's wings together. Observing the spectrum might be a bit tedious for beginners, but trust me, it's an essential foundation for the more interesting things we'll do later. How about this? If everyone can pick this up, I'll try to teach you how to interact with hippogriffs properly, and maybe you'll even get a chance to fly on Buckbeak for a bit. Really? Under Hagrid's earlier narration, the students' curiosity replaced some of their fear of the creature's imposing presence. Of course. In fact, before flying brooms were invented, hippogriffs were popular mounts, and even now, many enthusiasts ride them. But first we have to get through the class. Come on, Buckbeak. Spread your wings now. Just like that. Hagrid gently pinched the tip of Buckbeak's wing and slowly lifted it, displaying the entire wing to the students. Next, I'll demonstrate the wing spectrum. Everyone, pay close attention and compare what you see to your textbooks. He fumbled at his waist for a moment and then carefully produced a wand between two fingers. Ever since his wand rights had been restored, he no longer had to hide it in that little umbrella. And though it looked almost like chopsticks in his hand, the wand was actually over twice the length of an ordinary one. Hagrid tapped the wand and released a steady pulse of magic. A colorful glow spread over Buckbeak's wing. First, we need to understand what the different colors mean and where they appear, he explained in his rough voice. Though he'd left Hogwarts as a student and leaned more toward practical work than theory, this basic lesson posed no real difficulty for him. Teaching a group of 10-year-olds was well within his ability. Whenever a student looked confused, they raised a hand, and Hagrid, half thinking, "Isn't this obvious?" tried to say it in another way until they understood. Despite a few stumbles, he managed to get the point across to everyone. Excellent. After a quick round of questions to make sure the material had really stuck, Hagrid's restrained expression melted into a wide, silly grin. So, who wants to try actually interacting with a hippogriff? Almost all of Gryffindor shot their hands up, and more than half of Hufflepuff followed suit. Oh, looks like one Buckbeak might not be enough. I'll go fetch a few more in a bit. For now, I need a volunteer to demonstrate. Mr. Ken, you come. Avada lowered his raised hand and stepped forward, intending to approach Buckbeak at once. Hagrid stopped him with a raised palm. Careful, hippogriffs are proud. Any wrong or hasty move can be taken as an insult or provocation. Mr. Ken, stand there and follow my instructions. Everyone else, watch closely. Hagrid stayed to the side, holding Buckbeak's chain and giving soft directions. Look into his eyes. Hold his gaze. Don't blink too much. If you blink too often, the hippogriff won't trust you. Avada's eye twitched. He was a little uncomfortable with the idea of sustained eye contact, but he forced his eyelids open and looked straight into those large orange-yellow eyes. The color made him feel even stranger. All right, now bow, move gently, and then take a step back after bowing. Avada followed Hagrid's instructions carefully. Buckbeak, facing him, lowered his scaly forelegs in a clear, dignified bow. Very good, Hagrid beamed. He allows you to touch him. You can pat his beak, gently now. Avada approached with a mixture of curiosity and caution. This was his first time interacting so closely with such a dangerous magical creature. He reached out and tapped Buckbeak's hard beak a few times. The hippogriff closed his eyes in a lazy, contented manner. Excellent. Do you want to try riding him, Ken? Usually you'd need a proper saddle, but he won't mind if you simply hug his neck. Just don't pull his feathers. No, thank you. Avada knew his own flying talent. I'm afraid I'd grab on too wildly if I got nervous. All right, then. Hagrid nodded, then addressed the rest of the class. Remember the sequence: eye contact, bow, step back, and make sure your movements are gentle. Got it? Yes. Everyone wait here for a bit. I'll go fetch a few more hippogriffs. You can interact with them in pairs or groups of 3, take turns, and watch each other's technique. Not long after, Hagrid returned, leading a dozen hippogriffs of various colors, and brought them to the groups. He moved among the students, correcting their posture, reminding them to be gentle, and placating any slightly annoyed hippogriffs. The remaining class time soon ran out. All right, next lesson I'll try to provide a saddle so you can ride. That's all for today. Goodbye, children. Hagrid waved them off, delighted. The first lesson of his teaching career had gone surprisingly well. He planned to celebrate and to write a letter to Professor Kettleburn and to Mr. Belby. Hey, Hagrid. After class, when he no longer needed the formal title, Avada approached Hagrid as the caretaker settled the hippogriffs back in their pens. How does it feel to be a professor? Brilliant, Hagrid said. Among familiar faces, he relaxed even more, his grin growing larger. And they liked the class, too. They did. Your lesson was excellent, Avada said. It's amazing you designed such a course on your first day. Even Professor McGonagall has students working as part-time teaching assistants. You must be a natural. Heh, not all my doing, Hagrid said with a sheepish smile, scratching his head. Do you remember Professor Kettleburn's basilisk breeding project? Of course, but what does that have to do with this? I helped with that over the summer. To make the basilisks easier to tame, we set up a project to decipher Parseltongue and looked at many methods for teaching creatures. The person who helped me most was a gentleman named Damocles Belby. Belby? Avada said in surprise. The inventor of the wolfsbane potion? You know him? I thought his research was rather obscure. Hagrid brightened even more. He even talked teaching with me for ages after he heard I was going to be a professor. Though it felt more like he was lecturing me, it helped a lot. And he really liked my idea of using a monster book of monsters. He said it would let students learn how to handle aggressive creatures while taming the book. Heh, at first I only thought the book was fun. I didn't expect it to be so useful for lessons. Remarkable, Avada said sincerely. Compared with the original story, Hagrid's teaching skills were exceptional now. If Belby could straighten Hagrid out like that, he must be a remarkable teacher in his own right, maybe even a professor somewhere, though he hadn't appeared in the original tale. 173. Belby's research notes. Defense against the dark arts is the day after tomorrow, so I'll have to wait a bit before I can observe Lupin's werewolf curse. After saying goodbye to Hagrid, Avada, curious about Damocles Belby's teaching, started thinking over the long list of things he wanted to do. Speaking of Belby, maybe I should head to the library first and look up the wolfsbane potion. Even if I can't get the full recipe, I could read the papers and learn the principles. That'll help when I analyze the werewolf curse later. He paused. But he's an expert on werewolves. Why would he be interested in a basilisk breeding project? That farm's been drawing a lot of attention lately. After dinner in the Great Hall, Avada went straight to the library to look for material on the wolfsbane potion. It was the first day of term, so most professors hadn't given homework yet, and the students weren't buried in books. The library was unusually quiet, mostly occupied by industrious fifth years. Avada's mind wandered to his own future. Next year, I'll be in fifth year. Try wizard tournament. Wonderful. He didn't doubt he could master the fifth-year curriculum and ace his OBULs, but the sheer volume of work was daunting, even for someone who could multitask as well as he could. He half wished there'd be some policy like homework reduction for students with perfect exam records by then, potion section, curse removal. Maybe? I hope it's not in the restricted section. After a few minutes searching among the stacks, he found Belby's writings on the wolfsbane potion. There's even a full recipe attached? He didn't mean to keep this for profit, Avada thought, impressed. He lowered his head and began to read Damocles Belby's notes. Forward. For a long time, the werewolf problem has been an intractable, chronic illness in the magical community. Werewolves are ostracized because of the danger they pose. Many, driven by that ostracism, become mentally unbalanced and develop antisocial tendencies, committing harmful acts that only deepen society's prejudice against them. It is a problem that seems inherently unsolvable. The root of this issue lies in our inability to cure the werewolf curse. As a result, the number of werewolves can only be reduced by death, an action that is extreme and unjust when done merely because of someone's condition. Although the current number of werewolves is small and most live on the margins of society, I believe that as our magical society develops, the number will grow until it can no longer be ignored. When I learned of the atrocious acts of a werewolf named Fenrir Greyback, I became determined to research a cure for lycanthropy. Because of my professional inclinations, I have focused on treating the werewolf curse with potions. After 2 years of intensive research, I have achieved preliminary results. These are far from perfect. The potion cannot completely cure the curse, and the ingredients are costly and difficult to acquire. The brewing process is challenging to control. Still, its ability to suppress the frenzy could be of immediate help, so I have decided to make these results public. Avada's mouth tightened. Greyback, that name alone triggered grim memories. He read on. Belby's note continued in dense theory and symbolic formulas. Avada skimmed the more advanced sections. Much of it was beyond his present experience, and he had no physical reference for the magical structures Belby described. Still, he admired what the research implied. To collect enough werewolf data, Belby must have spent long periods among werewolves, gathering samples, observing behavior, interviewing them about their experiences, and even studying them after their most violent transformations. To do that for over 2 years, constantly facing the risk of being harmed or assimilated, he had to possess not only skill and knowledge, but iron persistence. Avada felt a surge of respect for a potion master he had never met. He read further. Through these 2 years of research, I have sketched a future direction. The knowledge and techniques required to fully overcome the werewolf problem span countless disciplines, perhaps an endless breadth of knowledge. This exceeds what any one person can master and will require the concerted effort of many specialists from different fields. This is an unprecedented challenge in our magical community. Most of our achievements thus far stem from work within a single field or only shallow engagements across several. Wizards' long lives and sharp minds have allowed some individuals to become polymaths, which raises the threshold for true interdisciplinary collaboration. Perhaps the werewolf problem will be the catalyst that pushes magical study into a new realm. To encourage such collaboration, I will make all my notes on the wolfsbane potion public in the hope of inspiring talented minds. I will continue my own research and seek like-minded colleagues. Avada nodded to himself. That would explain his involvement with the basilisk research. He's looking for experts in other fields to collaborate with. He reflected on Belby's claim that interdisciplinary work hadn't yet taken root. It made sense. How many fields did Dumbledore master alone? Charms, transfiguration, alchemy, potions, dark arts. With a long life and potions that sharpened his wits, the chance of a single wizard becoming a true polymath was much higher than for a Muggle scientist. That raised the barrier to team-based breakthroughs. If I'm going to look for a universal cure, there isn't much I can do right now, Avada thought. At best, I can observe Lupin's vitality and try to infer a general direction. The rest will be slow knowledge accumulation, just like Belby said. He leafed through the appendix with the recipe and production notes. Belby had warned repeatedly, rare and expensive ingredients, a delicate brewing process, and high risk. No wonder the wolfsbane potion hadn't been widely adopted. Then, as he was piecing everything together, Avada suddenly froze. From somewhere deep in his awareness came a prickling sensation. The mental trace of Peter Pettigrew's location, which Avada had been keeping tabs on, shifted. It moved, and it moved fast, faster than he had ever sensed before. 174. The arrest plan begins in advance. What's going on? Avada raised an eyebrow, surprised. This was a scene he had never seen in the 2 years he'd been here. After thinking for a moment, he pieced it together. It must be Crookshanks, Hermione's cat, making life difficult for Peter Pettigrew. Perfect timing. I can use this to move on Pettigrew. Hopefully Crookshanks and I can cooperate. He remembered, too, that Sirius Black had nearly broken into Hogwarts and attacked the fat lady before term ended last year. With no Dementors in the castle now, Sirius would move even sooner. He couldn't delay. He had to act fast. He put Damocles Belby's research notes back on the shelf and scanned the library. Not seeing who he was looking for, he left and checked the Great Hall, the Quidditch pitch, and the kitchens off his common room, but no luck. Those two are impossible to pin down. He went up to the corridor outside the Gryffindor common room and stopped a student in a red-trimmed robe. "Excuse me, do you know where Fred and George are?" "Fred and George?" The boy blinked. "They said they were sneaking into Hogsmeade today. I even asked them to bring back some fizzing whizbees. Those two are slippery, know every secret passage and always duck past Filch." "Thanks," Avada scratched his head. Typical twin behavior. Hogsmeade was closed on Saturday mornings, and yet they'd gone there on the first day of term. Still, knowing they were in Hogsmeade helped. Last year, before he found the Chamber of Secrets, he'd done a late-night sweep of the whole school and explored almost every secret passage. He knew Hogwarts better than most of the current students, better than the twins even. There were 7 secret passages to Hogsmeade. 4 were known to Filch, so the twins wouldn't use those. Of the remaining 3, one behind the 5th-floor mirror had collapsed, likely age and the basilisk's tremors, so it was unusable. The passage under the Humping Willow was useless to the twins too. They didn't know its secret. That left only one passage they could have used. Avada only had to wait by that entrance, and he had to hurry before they came back. The entrance was behind the one-eyed witch statue at the doorway of a classroom. He cast a disillusionment charm on himself and, thinking about Belby's thesis, waited. A faint click sounded. A red-haired head poked out and listened. When it was clear, one redhead squeezed through, then another followed carrying 2 large bags. Avada dropped the disillusionment charm. He was now less than a meter away. Whoa! Fred, probably Fred, bumped George with the back of his head and nearly sent them both stumbling back into the passage. They righted themselves, bowed theatrically, and said in exaggeratedly pitiful voices, "Professor, this time we—" "Ahem, it's just me." Avada took 2 small steps back out of reach. The twins jerked their heads up. "Huh, Ken?" They both blurted, eyes widening. For a moment they didn't pounce, they just stared at him in disbelief. "Someone told me you'd gone to Hogsmeade," Avada said, smiling, "and I happen to know all 7 of the secret passages and that only one is usable now, so if I were going to find you, I'd wait here." "Oh, right, because you've seen the Marauders map." One of them, presumably George, closed the passage behind them with a click and slipped into his usual sardonic expression. To memorize secret passage locations like that, you must have a knack for rule-breaking. "What do you want, old-timer?" "I need to borrow the Marauders map again." The twins were surprised. "Who are you going to catch this time? Sirius Black snuck into the school? Are you and Dumbledore trying to trap him?" "It's not that." Avada gave a small shiver, then rolled his eyes. "This one's for me. Let's just say I'm setting up a little prank." They ignored the weak excuse. The twins shrugged and slid in on either side of him, draping arms over his shoulders. The one on the left said slowly, "But since it's for your own fun and not official, shouldn't you show some appreciation?" Yeah, who scares someone before borrowing something? The one on the right added. So what do you owe us? Both of them brightened at once. What was that invisibility thing you used? The disillusionment charm? We want to learn it. Choose another favor. Avada really did roll his eyes this time. That charm is controlled by the ministry. I learned it once because it was useful against Voldemort, but it's not a school thing anymore. It's illegal to teach it. He knew perfectly well what would happen if the twins learned the charm. They'd amplify every prank tenfold, get caught by Snape or McGonagall, and someone would ask where they learned it. The trail would lead to him, and he'd get a stern warning, worse than anything he wanted. We'll think of something else, the twins said, waving the idea off. One of them cheerfully pulled a folded scrap of parchment from his pocket and slapped it into Avada's hand. Remember to bring it back soon. We're going to give this to Harry. He didn't get permission to go to Hogsmeade this year, so he needs it more than we do. Okay, thanks, Fred. You're welcome. I'm George. The tracking charm on Peter Pettigrew would last another 10 days or so, more than enough time for Avada. If 10 days weren't enough to finish his plan, it would mean he had failed outright. With the Marauder's map in hand, I only need a few more steps. Brew a potion, set up a stabilizer, and... After saying goodbye to the twins, Avada went straight to the room of requirement on the 8th floor and opened his private room. Apart from the Horcruxes, which he always carried with him, everything else he needed for research, or items too cumbersome to take along, had been stored here. Where the room had once been no bigger than a toilet, his exclusive chamber had grown into a roomy, comfortable lab. Rows of bottles and jars neatly labeled on several tables, a handful of large instruments he had built himself, and the black vanishing cabinet tucked into a corner, far tidier than it had been 2 years ago. He closed the door, slid open a nearby drawer, and took out a heavy stone basin. Inside, a liquid pulsed with a white glow, a flowing mass of light, the pensieve. Pensieves were popular among wizards, especially the long-lived. Their market value varied wildly. Some preserved memories perfectly for nearly forever and cost hundreds of galleons. Cheap ones only lasted a few years and were worth 10 or so. Baron had told him as much in a letter from a mental artifact maker he'd recommended. Avada's pensieve was the cheapest model. He only needed it for a few months. He'd avoided buying second-hand because of potential faults, though he wasn't sure high-end pensieves were even sold used. One last check. He drew a strand of light from the basin with his wand, gently connected it to his temple, and closed his eyes. He savored the sensation a moment, then sighed in relief and poured the memory back into the basin. No problem. All the details line up, a little polish when I use it, and there won't be any flaws. Constructing that memory had taken a semester and most of a summer. Even though the content wasn't huge, it had to intermittently span 12 years. One slip, and the fabric of the memory could be exposed. Even a mental master like Avada had to expend 12 times the normal effort to weave those years together perfectly. I also need some potions and a stabilizer. He tapped a raw piece of wood with his wand. It transformed into a compact device that looked part mousetrap, part miniature hospital bed. He selected ingredients from the jars and moved to a table of vessels to brew. A pale silver liquid, faintly glowing, began to bubble over a violet flame. Good quality, he nodded. He checked the timetable. This potion will take about 2 days over the weekend. Ron should be in Hogsmeade, so I can use that window to deal with Pettigrew. If everything goes well, the whole procedure will take an hour. It just depends on how long Ron stays. Fortunately, I put the tracking charm on Peter Pettigrew, not on Ron, he added, and took out the folded parchment from his pocket. He ran a finger over the dense magical tracery and gave a small, appreciative sigh. What a masterful design. He thought of the 4 who had made it: Potter, Sirius, Remus, and the one who betrayed them. There had to be help from the Potter family's secrets and the Black's hidden lore, but that didn't diminish the creator's talent. If those 4 had put more time into it back then, given enough years, they'd have become top-tier alchemists. But the amount of rule-breaking required to make the map was staggering. In Avada's view, the map was tied directly into Hogwarts itself, which was why it could display everyone's true name and location. Everyone except him. If he stepped outside the room of requirement, his spot on the map would be nothing but a blot of ink. That immunity was probably related to the same property that made him resistant to name enchantments. The way the map linked to the castle was astonishing. The creators had discovered the main structural framework of Hogwarts, and by some brilliant method, implanted a modified localization charm and a true name revelation charm into it without disturbing the castle's functioning. They then bound those charms to a parchment made of special materials so the castle itself could locate people and display them on the map. Those charms remained embedded in the castle's core to this day, unnoticed and harmless to Hogwarts' regular magic maintained by the professors every year. The castle's enchantments were dated. Evidence lay in things like its prohibition on apparition, but that didn't hide the creator's genius. Reproducing the map was simply impractical. The materials alone would require a dozen potions and alchemical reagents, and secretly implanting charms into Hogwarts' structure without trace would take months of painstaking work. Even with Avada's ability to perceive magic, his best estimate still put the workload extremely high. The four who made it had spent far more time than most could imagine, and yet, paired with an old invisibility cloak, the map was the ultimate tool for breaking school rules. "So, it's rather poetic," he murmured, "that Peter Pettigrew, the one who saw this map come into being, should fall prey to a device left behind by the friends he betrayed." He folded the parchment carefully, slipped it back into his pocket, took a final look at the potion, bubbling over the violet flame, and quietly left the room of requirement. 176. What bad intentions could the killing curse have? Friday. Ken, do you need us for something? At noon, Avada intercepted Harry and his two friends at the entrance to the Great Hall just after lunch. The three of them exchanged a look, part curiosity, part dread. They still remembered last semester's catastrophe that had almost made the basilisk explode. "You haven't found something terrifying again, have you?" "Not at all. I'm not some jinx," Avada said, shrugging with an innocent expression. "What bad intentions could the killing curse possibly have?" "I just wanted to ask you a favor." He steered them into a quieter corner, which only made them more nervous. "Could you avoid using the room of requirement this weekend? I need to brew some potions in there." "Oh, that." Hermione visibly relaxed. "Don't worry, we weren't planning to use the room of requirement this weekend anyway. We're going to Hogsmeade." "That's you guys. I can't go." Harry's face fell. "My family didn't sign the permission." Ron said it for him. "We actually went to Professor McGonagall this morning, but she wouldn't approve it either. I don't get it. She knows Harry's home situation. This is ridiculous." "Indeed," Avada nodded, appearing sympathetic while inwardly pleased. He'd extracted the information he wanted. Them going to Hogsmeade this weekend meant his plan was less likely to be discovered. He almost smiled, but Hermione suddenly snapped to attention, her brown curls bristling. "What kind of potion do you need to brew in secret in the room of requirement? It's not another illegal potion, is it? Has something else gone wrong that you need to investigate quietly?" Harry and Ron turned pale. Hogsmeade had been unexpectedly closed on Saturday mornings this term. The rumor mill about Sirius Black was still churning. Avada hastened to dispel their worry. "Not at all." He forced a calm smile and tried to keep his mouth from twitching. "Can't I have a little private life and research? And you expect me to deal with Sirius Black? You think I could last 5 seconds against him? This is the man Azkaban couldn't hold." To make sure they would leave him in peace and to let them enjoy Hogsmeade without suspicion, Avada softened his tone. "Look, so far I haven't found anything as dangerous as last year. Hogwarts is still a school, after all. You can't expect a major disaster every year, can you?" Sorry, we were probably overreacting." Harry and his friends quickly apologized when they saw how tense he looked. Ken had been under pressure before. Now that he seemed to be easing off, they didn't want to bring up old scares. "It's fine, it's nothing. I'm brewing potions for personal work." He gave them another mild smile. "Are you sure you won't be using the room? Good. Have fun in Hogsmeade. There are lots of new things to see. Harry, don't be too discouraged. Maybe you'll get another chance." After sending them on their way, Avada went to the Great Hall for his own lunch, then checked his timetable. Afternoon classes, Defense Against the Dark Arts, 2 lessons back to back. Finally, he thought, time to observe Lupin. I wonder what my boggart will look like. Good afternoon, children. That afternoon's Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson was a combined class for Hufflepuff and Slytherin. The new professor, remainder of his face lined by wear, but smiling cheerfully, was already in the classroom, greeting the students as they filtered in. It's a shame. We were supposed to have a practical lesson today, but the boggart I had prepared was blown up by the 3rd years yesterday. So we'll have a theoretical lesson for now, until I can find another one. A boggart, a few voices chimed. Yes, a boggart. I know you learned about this creature in your 3rd year, but this year, as 4th years, we'll begin to probe a very special area, mental magic. It remains one of the forefronts of magical research even today. Lupin smiled. Coincidentally, the boggart we studied last year connects directly with this field. I suppose your previous professor didn't have you face a boggart in a practical lesson, did they? A low chuckle ran through the room. They all remembered the last professor's style. Lupin let the laughter die down and then posed his question. How does a boggart know your deepest fear? The question hung in the air. A few hands went up, sparse and tentative. Mr. Sheffick, you answer. Baron lowered his hand and stood. Through simple legilimency, Professor. Correct. 3 points to Slytherin. Lupin smiled and gestured for him to sit. Legilimency, reading thoughts, directly peering into the mind. Some of you may be unfamiliar with the term, but over the coming year we'll encounter it often and learn both how to use and how to resist these kinds of magic. That's what we'll focus on in our 4th and 5th years. How to resist the most profound and dangerous of the dark arts, mental magic. Of course, mental magic is difficult and deep. Resisting it is even harder. You'll only gain a preliminary understanding of the field by the time you graduate. If you want to study it in depth, you may need specialized vocational training after school. Now, turn to page 5 in your textbooks. We'll begin to explore mental magic formally, using the boggart as our example. Lupin picked up a piece of chalk and wrote a complicated-looking diagram on the board. First, we need to understand some basic definitions and concepts. As he wrote, he spoke clearly and methodically. Avada couldn't help rolling his eyes. The material was less challenging than what he'd studied in his 2nd and 3rd years. With the Ministry's iron control over mental magic, the 4th-year curriculum skimmed the surface. Some simple meditation techniques, ways to steady the mind, dispel fear, or break basic illusions. There was no occlumency instruction here, let alone anything deeper. No wonder the textbook psychodynamics was forbidden, Avada thought. The gap between what's in that book and what's in the class was like another world. I solemnly swear that I will not do small jobs. I solemnly swear that I will not do small jobs. So a boggart isn't as magical as you might think. For most people, mind magic remained one of the hardest branches of magic. Even though the first lesson of 4th year only covered the basics, Professor Lupin still needed the 90-minute double period to make sure every student below him understood. The topic circled back to boggarts. Their legilimency is very shallow, he said. They can only read a single fear. So even if you finish this lesson and understand what a boggart really is, you don't have to worry about a boggart sitting in the corner reading your deepest thoughts. Lupin leaned against the wall beside a blackboard covered in notes. After making sure everyone had finished copying and had turned their attention back to him, he wrapped up the lesson with a relaxed expression that drew a ripple of quiet, amused laughter. To give the simplest example, he continued, everyone has things they're afraid of, right? Spiders, venomous snakes, a certain person. Most of those are concrete images. But suppose those things were about to destroy what you hold most dear, or hurt your family and friends. Would you draw your wand and step forward? I think most people would say yes. That shows that the fear of losing loved ones or possessions is stronger than the fear of spiders or snakes, and that's the boggart's limitation. It can only pick out things that startle you, things that trigger a fear. It can't see into what you truly fear. Professor, a student raised a hand. What if someone fears something abstract like death? That's even easier. Lupin smiled. Experiments show a boggart will only turn into concrete things, It won't become an abstract scenario to stage your greatest fear. For example, if someone's greatest fear is their own death, a boggart will become that person's corpse, not a dark wizard cackling and casting the killing curse. The person will know they're not actually dead and can recognize the boggart. That sort of scare is harmless. So, as a dark creature studied early on, the boggart gives us limited insight into soul magic. Its value has been more practical for transfiguration. In the last century, someone mimicked the boggart's bodily traits and produced a top-quality transfiguration material called boggart glue, which is still widely used in transfiguration and alchemy. Don't ask me how it works. I don't know the details. If you want more, go ask Professor McGonagall. She taught me, after all. Seeing a hand raised with curiosity, Lupin grinned and waved it away. All right, almost time to go. It's a shame the first lesson is a bit dry. Next time, I'll bring in more dark creatures. When the bell rang, Lupin was the first to pack his notes and leave. Students rose in twos and threes, chattering about their new professor as they filed out. Finally, a reliable teacher. He explains things so clearly. And he's planning practicals right away. If nothing interrupts him, his classes will be interesting. I wonder how he'll leave, though. He doesn't seem rash or power-hungry. Must be no scandal, right? Then something will suddenly come up, and he'll have to go, or he'll injure himself. Oh, and I heard Lupin was friends with Sirius Black. He's not going to be driven out by Black, is he? Merlin's beard. Conversation trailed off. With a defense against the dark arts teacher changing every year for decades, speculating how the new professor would disappear had become a Hogwarts pastime. Most wizards who applied for the post knew the reputation and didn't care. It was part of the job, as much a tradition as curriculum. Where is that cursed thing, then? Why can't I find it? Avada wondered. He packed his things and headed to ancient ruins. After gaining the ability to perceive the essence of the soul, he suspected the curse, like the Chamber of Secrets, was constructed with soul magic. He had searched the castle again from top to bottom. Not in the main architecture, not on the professor involved, not in the Defense Against the Dark Arts office, and not attached to any objects handed down through successive professors. Did Dumbledore not read Voldemort's memory to learn the truth of the curse, as he had with the diary, after sealing Voldemort's main soul? Or could Voldemort, even sealed, still block Dumbledore's legitimacy? He shook his head and gave up thinking about it. When Voldemort was gone, the problem would disappear with him. As the saying went, if you can't solve the problem, solve the person who created it. For Avada, once the creator was dealt with, the problem would be solved along the way. How convenient. That evening, he drank a diluted sleeping draught and went to bed early, waking before 5 on Saturday. After grabbing a few bites in the kitchens, he hurried to his private room of requirement and stood beside the vessel where a potion had been simmering. What had been a pale silver brew had, after days of brewing, turned into a liquid that looked like flowing diamonds, like soapy water shot through with glitter. He took it off the flame, inspected and sniffed it, and nodded once. He spread a sheet of parchment on the table, tapped it with his wand, and whispered, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." A corner of his mouth lifted. He hadn't lied to Prongs and the others. From any legal standpoint, he certainly wasn't planning to do anything good this time. In the long plan he was about to begin, measured in years, the things he intended to do with his own hands would be enough to land him in Azkaban for who knew how long. 178. Plan pass. The moment his wand tapped, thin black lines spidered out like a web from the tip, linking and crisscrossing until they filled the parchment. Bright green ornate script unfurled across the top. Moonface, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. Messrs. Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, purveyors of aids to magical mischief makers, are proud to present the Marauder's Map. When Avada unfolded the sheet, large enough to cover a whole table, Hogwarts and its grounds lay before him in exquisite detail. Secret entrances were carefully marked, the kitchens, a number of hidden passages. Not a trace of the Chamber of Secrets or the Room of Requirement appeared, though. The chamber was one thing. With the talents of those four, it surprised him they hadn't mapped the Room of Requirement. He let the thought sit for a moment, then shifted his attention to the Gryffindor dormitories. Side by side, the beds were labeled Harry Potter, Ronald Weasley, Dean Thomas, Seamus Finnegan, Neville Longbottom. It was still before 5 in the morning. The names lay motionless, occasionally flickering slightly as if someone had turned over in their sleep. Next to Ronald Weasley, a sixth name remained clearly printed, Peter Pettigrew. So Fred and George really never noticed Ron, Avada muttered. He picked up the still warm potion bottle with gloved hands and decanted a portion into a smaller vial, tapping its neck with his wand until the mouth reshaped into a fine glass dropper. I brewed too much. Half a bottle will do. He let the potion cool, pocketed it, then brewed a pot of tea with the lab apparatus. From another pocket, he drew Dumbledore's gift, the collection of Nicholas Flamel's research notes, scribbled a few keywords on the cover, opened one of the volumes, and settled into a chair with his legs crossed. For the next few hours, he read like an old man sipping tea and scanning the paper. Time slipped by. When he looked back at the Marauders' map at lunchtime, he watched Harry and Ron leave their dormitory and appear in the Great Hall, Hermione at their side, likely soothing Harry over missing Hogsmeade. Peter's name still blinked motionless on Ron's bed. Good. He narrowed his focus to the 3 names that mattered most: Peter Pettigrew, Ronald Weasley, and Harry Potter. He followed their movements. Harry and Ron out of the hall, a return to the dormitories to gather things, a meeting with Hermione in the common room, then the cluster of names at the first-floor entrance as Filch checked for Hogsmeade permissions. At last, Ron and Hermione's names left the castle entirely, while Harry's lingered only long enough for him to return once to the common room before vanishing toward the library. Perfect. No surprises. Avada smiled, eyes fixed on Peter's inert name on the map. Ron would never drag a sickly old rat to Hogsmeade. Then, begin. He darted a quick glance down the 8th-floor corridor. No one was near, cast a disillusionment charm over himself, snatched the map, and vanished from the room of requirement into the spatial interstice with a Ji-Chi Tianya curse. He produced his broom from a pocket, mounted, and flew straight for the tower that held the Gryffindor dormitory. Using the map and his magical senses in tandem, he found the exact room. The animagus signature, the particular life force pattern of a rate, flared within his senses. Avada halted his broom at a place inside the room, but kept a distance from Ron's bed. Drawing his wand, he set up a string of concealment charms: scent nullification, footsteps muffled, body temperature masked, breathing silenced. Shh! He slipped out of the interstice as quietly as a shadow and saw Peter in person for the first time in years, sprawled beside Ron's pillow, dozing. Lovely. He hadn't burrowed into the covers, and his mind was relaxed. Everything was going smoothly. Avada aimed his wand, and in a motion as clean as lightning, fired a silent crimson stupefy at the rat's skull. Peter collapsed without a twitch. He added a few reinforced vocal stupefies to make sure the sleeping charm would hold for hours. A levitation charm lifted the limp body. A shrinking charm reduced his size, and Avada tucked him into a pocket. He re-entered the interstice, flicked his broom into motion, and shot back along the corridor. A moment later, he slammed into the room of requirement with a bang and breathed out in relief. Flawless, all in one go. He took Peter out again, fastened him to a device shaped like a rat trap, and uncorked the tiny eyedropper bottle. Gently prying the rat's mouth open, he poured half the vial down Peter's throat. That should do it. Avada, monitoring Peter's mental and life force signals closely, nodded and carried the unconscious rat to the Pensieve. He drew a strand of silvery light from within the basin with his wand and inspected it one last time. Satisfied, he guided that strand down and watched it sink into Peter Pettigrew's mind. But the work did not end with the memory's transfer. Avada held his wand fixed to Peter, closed his eyes, and concentrated until beads of cold sweat gathered on his brow. He felt as if he were threading something delicate inside someone else's head and had to keep the weave intact. Nearly 2 hours later, he finally lowered his wand. His eyelids creaked open to reveal hollow, bewildered eyes that slowly cleared. He exhaled, wiped his face, and allowed himself a small laugh. That took more energy than I expected, but it's within tolerances. The result is clean. He checked his watch in the Marauders map. Ron and Hermione were still in Hogsmeade. Everything had gone according to plan. Avada looked down at the sleeping, secured Peter with a relieved smile. A world where Peter is safe, Sirius is safe, Lupin is safe, I am safe, Harry is safe, and Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix are safe. Only the remnants of Voldemort remain hurt, has been achieved. He straightened, voice soft and strange. Now go, with your sins and your salvation. Contribute to the final victory. Humph. Avada had appeared in Harry and his friend's dormitory without warning once again, gently placing the still sleeping Peter Pettigrew beside Ron's pillow. He muttered an incantation so Pettigrew would wake naturally in over half an hour. After painstakingly checking the room for footprints, fingerprints, stray hairs, or any other trace of his presence, he slipped away. He had also set a stronger tracking spell on Pettigrew so he could monitor his movements at certain times later. I've done everything I can. The rest is up to Black and Dumbledore. I hope they don't waste this gift. Back in the room of requirement, he tidied his materials, arranged the jars and bottles, and reheated the now cold tea before drinking it. Satisfied no one was passing outside, he left the room of requirement again. He had been in there long enough, and he still had to return the Marauder's map to the twins. That man is a genius. If only he had some conscience and used his talents for good, Dumbledore might have had to share his title of greatest wizard of his time. He was thinking of that terrifying dark wizard who discovered the so-called deathly power and studied the confession effect in depth. The man's work in the realm of souls was unparalleled. Avada's current abilities, his method of binding Voldemort, his deep understanding of Horcruxes, the spell he used on Pettigrew, were all built on that research. The book the professor had given him contained only about 30 essays and notes, and 6 of them were by that one author alone. The man's experiments had been vast and meticulous. He had clearly impressed the professor. So how had he, and several other dark wizards mentioned in that book, ended up losing to the professor? It puzzled Avada. Among the dozen or so dark wizard authors in the volume, that fellow and 2 or 3 others were the most extensive and thorough experimenters. Did it mean that the professor could consistently defeat dark wizards whose strength was comparable to Grindelwald's, provided Grindelwald didn't have the Elder Wand? From Avada's observations, the professor's mental power was only on a par with top teachers like McGonagall and Flitwick. With combat experience and some unique magic, his practical fighting ability might surpass them, but at best he seemed comparable to those few dark wizards, not to mention those wizards had organizations backing large-scale experiments. How did he do it? No point in fretting. Finish the last steps first, then worry about the rest. Most students above 3rd year had spent a leisurely evening in Hogsmeade before returning to the castle. Now, many lay sprawled in the common room with stuffed bellies like seals on a beach. Fred and George had just squeezed back through the fat lady's portrait, each lugging a large bag and grinning like they'd struck gold. "The new dung bombs at Zonko's are brilliant," one of them crowed. Harry shot the twins a sullen glance from his chair beside Ron, then bent his head back to his homework. "Don't lose heart, Harry," Hermione said, reading his mood. "You'll get through it." "It'll be at least next year," Ron added, stroking Scabbers and sounding a touch worried. From what Harry told us, he probably doesn't want to go home for Christmas just to get his uncle's signature. "Harry should stay at school," Hermione urged. "But he can't be the only 3rd year left behind," Ron protested. He shifted to scratch Scabbers, who stretched out contentedly. Ron wasn't sure if it was his imagination, but Scabbers seemed better after their trip to Hogsmeade. Its eyes looked clearer somehow. Just then, Crookshanks hopped up onto Hermione's lap, carrying a palm-sized dead spider in his mouth. Ron's face puckered. He slid his chair away from Hermione. "Does he have to eat that right here?" "Oh, Crookshanks, clever boy. Did you catch that yourself?" Hermione cooed, ignoring Ron and stroking the cat. Crookshanks chewed methodically, then lifted his yellow eyes and fixed them on Ron. "Just let him be and don't move," Hermione said. Ron, wary, cupped Scabbers closer. "I know that cat's after Scabbers. Harry, have you finished your potions essay? I just finished the star chart. Should we swap?" He dragged his bag over, blocking Crookshanks's line of sight to Scabbers, then produced a fully written chart and a blank sheet with only a title, offering the finished one to Harry. Hermione rolled her eyes at their casual idea of borrowing, but said nothing. Crookshanks watched Ron without blinking, his fluffy tail flicking gently. Meow. Crookshanks hopped down and patted over, tilting his head and blinking his small eyes as he approached. Go away, you, Ron muttered, waving a hand and shielding Scabbers even more tightly. Meow, meow. The cat drew closer, trotting a few circles around Ron's chair. Hermione watched with interest. He's not going to hurt Scabbers, she observed. He seems curious about you. Curious? About me? Ron handed Scabbers to Harry and stood up. Crookshanks didn't follow Ron. His gaze had shifted and was now fixed on Harry's hand holding the rat. He's still after Scabbers, Ron said, frowning. Harry, be careful. Give Scabbers back to me first, or that cat might scratch you. He won't, Hermione snapped. Crookshanks, intent on whatever scent or detail he sensed, began trailing Ron again when Ron took Scabbers back. He sniffed and tilted his head, almost touching Ron's hand at one point, but he never acted like he intended to eat Scabbers. After a while, he drew back, let out a satisfied low mew, and jumped back into Hermione's lap. Half closed, he resumed being petted, perfectly content. Chapter 180. Everything is ready. Avada didn't know exactly what had happened between Crookshanks and Scabbers, though he had his suspicions. Ever since he'd reapplied a stronger tracking enchantment to Pettigrew, he no longer felt Peter's usual jittery, erratic movements. Had Crookshanks noticed Peter's change as well and given up the chase? That cat's instincts were absurdly sharp. In any case, the next 2 months were a rare spell of calm. Students attended classes, scrambled to finish homework, spent weekends dreaming about Hogsmeade, and constantly debated this year's Quidditch standings, next year's World Cup, and the newly released Firebolt broom. Avada had seen a firebolt in Diagon Alley. His impressions matched every glowing review. It outclassed the Nimbus 2001 in every respect: speed, stability, maneuverability, turning. The improvement was due to a technical breakthrough by an unlikely manufacturer. The firebolt didn't come from a giant like Nimbus or Cleansweep, but from a small, obscure team whose previous work had been on magical plants and transfiguration materials. One member of the team came from a family of traditional broom makers and brought long-cultivated, unique techniques. After the breakthrough, the team attracted investors and goblin collaboration, and by acquiring advanced power valve technology, they produced what many called a state-of-the-art broom. The problem was mass production. Each firebolt cost an astonishing amount. Only top national Quidditch teams and a few wealthy buyers could afford them. Still, the team made a fortune and were already planning to start their own broom company. None of that mattered much to Hogwarts students. Firebolts were outrageously expensive and wouldn't appear in school matches. Even Slytherin nobles would think twice before spending that much. So most students ignored the sales chatter and ramped up their own training. Last year, the Basilisk had left teams incomplete and shut down matches. This year, everyone wanted to make up for lost time. Training hours increased across the houses. It was rough on Cedric, prefect, Quidditch captain, and facing his OWLs while taking 11 classes, but that was his choice. Friends could only make him better food and be supportive. Professor Remus Lupin missed 2 classes over those months. Severus Snape, who had long coveted the Defense Against the Dark Arts chair, filled in. Whether Snape was quietly pleased because Lord Voldemort had been captured, or because Lupin had started taking his potion, his substitute lessons were competent, showing the rigor of someone with a more sinister past. He didn't force students to study werewolves, nor did he indulge in his usual thinly veiled barbs. Time passed peacefully, and Halloween Eve arrived. Hogsmeade was still off limits on Saturday morning, so the students stopped thinking about trips and focused instead on how to enjoy the Halloween feast. The Great Hall was already decked out. Hundreds of jack-o'-lanterns burned, a flock of live bats swooped overhead, and orange banners with flickering flames drifted lazily across the enchanted ceiling that showed the clear blue sky outside. Avada, however, spent the day alone in the room of requirement, bent over his work. "It's done," he said aloud. He circled an object on the table with a satisfied expression. It looked like a tiny vanishing cabinet, about the size of a human head, without a door, but its surface was engraved with deep silver filigree, and it gleamed with a strange inner light. Now to test it. He picked up the miniature cabinet and placed it over his head. He stood perfectly still for a long moment, then took a cautious step forward, then another, and even flicked his wand to cast a few small spells. Everything worked. Perfect. He removed the little cabinet carefully, as if handling something fragile. After setting it on the table, he punched the air in triumph. And potions, modules for power, balance, sensory transmission, information relay, self-repair, and maintaining transfiguration. Piece them together and the final form would resemble a wooden humanoid shell. It's time to enjoy another Halloween feast, he told himself. He cleaned up and left the room of requirement, passing through the busy hallways toward the Great Hall. As he walked under the enchanted sky, he thought ahead. In a few days,